Good afternoon, everybody. I know I was just saying to our panelists here that I think this is going to be one of the best sessions of the entire 3 days. So, and by the attendees in the room, I think we're off to a great start. I'm Dr. Jennifer Ashton. I am currently the Chief Medical Correspondent for ABC News until this Thursday. I'm board certified in OBGYN and obesity medicine, and I have a master's in nutrition, and I am really honored to be sharing the stage with two rock stars in this field. Dr. Amanda Velasquez is Director of Obesity Medicine at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and Dr. Harlan Krumholz is a cardiologist at Yale. I will not waste any more of our time telling you about their resumes, bios, CVs. They're too long. They would take up our entire panel, but I want to thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This is pretty much, the drug of the year, that maybe the drug of the decade, maybe the drug of the century. Before we get into kind of everything you want to know about GLP-1s, I want to start with actually finding out what you know at this point. So, this is a safe space. This is a judgment-free zone. No one is looking around, but I would like to bring us back to grade school and get a show of hands for some questions. First of all, how many people in this room have thought about your body weight in the last week? Okay, just so we're on the same page. What about the last 24 hours? Okay. How many people in this room have ever tried to lose 5 or more pounds? Everyone. 10 or more pounds. 25 or more pounds. Okay. Now, this is the real safe space question. How many people in this room, if you were completely by yourself, you and a credentialed physician, if given the opportunity to try a GLP-1 today, would do so? Okay, thank you for being honest. So I think we need to start when we talk about these medications. First, we need to talk about one of the things that they're used for today, which is the treatment of chronic obesity, which is now designated as a chronic disease. It is not a matter of willpower, commitment, dedication. Amanda, can you give us kind of the breakdown of the pathophysiology, if you will, of obesity?
Yeah, so obesity is essentially a disease of chronic low-grade inflammation that's happening on a cellular level. You can think back to the pandemic when they were talking about stats of patients who were living with obesity at higher risk for developing COVID-19. That was an infectious process, an inflammatory process that was compounded with an inflammatory disease, which then made it worse. So on a cellular level, it's inflammation. When we talk about what that inflammation does, it is going to basically wreak havoc on our system that's complex. It's basically the gut, the microbiome, interacting with our brain and different organ systems to basically help regulate how our body wants to hold its weight. And where we call that in medicine is the set point. Your body wants to defend a certain weight and stay at that weight. Many of you who have raised their hands, I appreciate you doing that, Jen, because it shows the commonality that we all experience in thinking about our weight and the struggle that we have had to lose weight and keep it off. And so when you think to those times how hard it is to keep weight off, it's not because you lack willpower, as Jen said, it's because the body is fighting against you. That is the pathophysiology, and that the body wants to hold you at the highest weight you've ever been at and keep that weight, which is called defending the fat mass point. That is very complex system, and so every time you try to lose that 10, 20 pounds, that's what's happening, is that you're not doing the right diet and not following the right exercise routine. It's that your body actually starts to creep back up and gain the weight, and that's where that yo-yoing happens for years until we can intervene with more treatments, and now we have newer treatments.
That's right. And just to wrap up that set point concept, and something that we know, but you may not know, if you take two people, pound for pound, the same weight, one is at their ideal body weight, let's say they weigh 200 pounds, the other person weighs 200 pounds, just lost 20 pounds to get there. The person who just lost 20 pounds, which is a gold star in our world of medicine for weight loss, burned 25% plus fewer calories at rest. They are hungrier and less full at baseline. So what Amanda's talking about, with what Harlan's going to talk about, with the complexity of this condition and how these medications can work, when you realize that fact, when I learned that fact, I thought, oh my gosh, how many millions of people are walking around saying, what is wrong with me? Why am I such a failure at this? It starts from the brain.
Yes.
To that point. So Harlan, now take us to this class of medication, which is not new. 2005, the first GLP-1 was FDA approved for the management of type 2 diabetes in this country. And kind of, if you met someone on a walk and they said, tell me about these medications, what would be your couple-minute debrief?
Well, thanks, Jen, and it's great to be on with you and Amanda. This is a terrific opportunity to kind of bring people up to speed about this. These are generational breakthrough medications. I don't think there's any way else to think about them. And we're going to focus maybe on obesity, but these medications have the potential to do a remarkable range of positive things that are about health and longevity. So we've known about these hormones. People call them incretins. They help the pancreas to produce hormone insulin since the 1970s and 1980s. But in the 1990s, there was a guy at the VA in the Bronx who was actually studying saliva from the Gila monster. And he begins to identify a hormone that is very much like this GLP-1, which is, they've discovered as being important for insulin. And actually the difference is that GLP-1 is very transient in our bodies. It stays around for a very short period of time. But he discovers these Gila monsters, which burrow underground and down-regulate their metabolism and can go for long periods of time without eating. Somehow in their saliva, they've got this substance which has much more long-acting properties, but is very similar in its effect to this GLP-1. And all of a sudden, people start, trying to figure out, can this thing be used? And next thing they discover, they're focusing on diabetes because that's where insulin's so important. But they're also discovering this thing has effect on neurons and neurodegenerative disorders and a whole range of other things. But in the drug development, it really is the diabetes area where it starts to take off. And in 2005, it gets approved as a means to help control blood sugar. And it does it okay, pretty well. It's not gangbusters, but it does a pretty good job. There's also another class of medications which are inhibiting the degradation, the breakdown of this GLP-1, the DPP-4 drugs that have also kind of emerged. But it turns out that these GLP-1s, people look, they are remarkable. Can I just tell you one more thing about this? Which is, so early on in the diabetes piece, people saw that there were drugs that were lowering blood sugar, but there were questions about whether they were actually increasing cardiovascular risk. We call these surrogate endpoints. It's like everyone came in and said, this must be good for you because your blood sugar's under greater control. But sometimes when we look at one thing, the body's got so many millions of things going on at one time, that something else, that a drug which has thousands of effects, we're just looking at blood sugar, can have offsetting effects. We sometimes call these off-target effects because we're targeting the blood sugar, but there are other things that can happen. And the sulfonylureas, you may have heard about these kind of drugs people were using, there was suspicion that these were actually increasing cardiovascular risk. So the FDA in 2008 says, if you're going to come out with a new diabetes drug, you have to show it's safe. You have to do these cardiovascular outcome studies to show it's safe. So when they've got these new GLP-1s, these GLP-1s, they're encumbered to do this trial to demonstrate the safety. And lo and behold, they don't just show it's safe, but they show it reduces cardiovascular risk by about 20%, more than you would have expected by the way it controlled the blood sugar. And it starts to open up this entire avenue where people are starting to say, these drugs, they may be actually more powerful in risk reduction in ways that we don't even understand yet. And so for me, I'm all in on what are these drugs going to do for individuals and populations as an extraordinary new tool to help promote health and longevity.
So on that point of surrogate endpoints and other effects, let's talk about, and I would like to hear from both of you on this, every week there's a new headline, there's a new study released. GLP-1s help sleep apnea, GLP-1s help depression, GLP-1s help addictive behavior, alcohol consumption, etc. I can't wait for them to say they help wrinkles. You
haven't heard about Ozempic face?
No, oh yeah. But that's a negative.
Oh yeah,
so,
no, but it could be good in some people.
So So what is it as a physician, at first when I read that headline and I have to do the deep dive and read the study, I say, well, of course it helps sleep apnea. If you have 50 plus pounds to lose or even 20 pounds to lose and you lose that weight, your sleep apnea is going to improve. I would like to hear from both of you about what kinds of side effects are directly linked to the weight loss and what may be indirectly linked to the way these drugs work.
Yeah, sure. So with these medications, because they're targeting areas in the brain, we know that it's going to cause mostly GI side effects. So the most common side effects one will experience are usually nausea, vomiting, or potentially some diarrhea or constipation. The important thing to remember, though, is because this has become so mainstream, I mean, I would say, we could get a show of hands of how many people in this room have heard the word Ozempic prior to this, talk. I would imagine it's almost the majority, yes. So the point is that this is so mainstream, there's been attention to the side effects of this, and it's a different lens than society has on other medications, because we hold anti-obesity medications to a different standard because of our inherent biases around obesity. And so with that, my point is that we have honed in on side effects in the media, but I want to make a point that the trials showed that only 7% of patients in the STEP trials, which looked at semaglutide, the generic form of Wegovy, it looked that only 7% had to discontinue from the trial as a result of severe side effects. So my point is that these are mild to moderate side effects for the majority, and it's very important to work with a clinician to really titrate or control the dosing of the medication to allow for your tolerance, because not everyone needs to be on the highest dose, and that's really key.
And for everyone, it depends how you start. Everyone has to start at a low dose, right?
Yes, very important.
So before we leave side effects, I also would like both of you to address something that I think is very important and not often explained well, whether it's in the healthcare provider's office or in the media. When you hear 1% side effect, right? That's something that in medicine we feel pretty good about that. 1%, you're going to be fine. 99%, you're not going to have that side effect. Understand that if 100 people are taking that drug and you have a side effect risk of 1%, that's going to be one case of X, whatever it is. If 1 million people are taking that drug, there are going to be 1% of those people walking around saying, well, I had that side effect, I had that side effect. And in the media, it will seem like a lot more. We heard this and we lived through it with COVID. It's very important that when you talk about any medication, and this is just one class of FDA-approved weight loss medications, it's the gold standard in terms of pharmacotherapy, but there are others. You have to understand that concept of absolute risk versus relative risk.
Definitely.
Well, I think what's important, let me just say, by the way, I'm not paid by any of the companies. I'm not on a speakers bureau, and so I at least can assert that I have an independence of my opinion about this. So when I'm telling you a generational drug, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because in the beginning what they did is they took these drugs and they said, let's look at a variety of these intermediate endpoints. And they saw, oh my gosh, it lowers inflammation. Oh my gosh, it produces weight loss in ways we didn't think were possible before. It improves his vascular health. We have measures of vascular health that we can look at. And a whole range of these sort of assays, measurements we can do. But then the question was, what about patient outcomes? And we're in the midst of a remarkable period where the trials that have been started several years ago are now looking at patient outcomes for a variety of conditions where we didn't have any treatments. So for example, heart failure, people have heart failure, but some people have heart failure where their heart function, their heart muscle squeezes well, but it doesn't relax well. Well, we have a whole variety of medications for people whose hearts don't squeeze well, but for the people, increasingly large percentage of people with heart failure, and a large number of them have obesity, their hearts squeeze well. We've had almost nothing to offer. We've had one medication only to offer them. Very little, very frustrating as a clinician. The STEP-HF trial comes out and shows if you treat these people with obesity and heart failure with preserved systolic function, a gangbusters amazing benefit with regard to their symptoms. A month ago, people with diabetes and chronic renal failure, very difficult to slow the progression of renal failure in these individuals. And comes out in the New England Journal of Medicine, gangbusters, 20% reduction in risk in progression to dialysis and other things. Just yesterday, the sleep apnea. You know what we tell our people with sleep apnea is wear those obtrusive, ridiculous things that people have to wear at night. By the way, when Philips put out, it actually killed people. These CPAP things weren't good. It's not without risk to actually treat the disease. This thing comes out, and it almost cut in half the number of apneic episodes that people had who were losing weight. And cardiovascular risk, 20% reduction in people with cardiovascular disease when it was added on to statins in addition. People with obesity, with cardiovascular disease, taking these medications reduced by 20%. But here's the kicker to all this in the cardiovascular disease space. It seems like the benefit is dissociated to some extent from the weight loss. So it's actually a heart drug. And that's what we got to understand a little better.
So let's talk about the off-label use of these medications, because I'm sure there are a lot of us sitting in this room who think, this sounds pretty good to me. And I remember, I'm the daughter of a cardiologist. I literally grew up hearing my father say, statins should be in the water. Why? Heart disease is the #1 killer of men and women in this country and worldwide. We know that statins save lives. You can't build a plaque in your coronary arteries without an elevated LDL. Correct me if he's wrong on any of this. And so that was 25, 35, 45 years ago. Now we have this class of medication. People sitting here saying, okay, well, maybe I only have 10 pounds to lose. If there are all these non-weight loss associated benefits, will we be able to use them as prevention or off-label? So Amanda, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that may be the future of what we see as we get more data. I mean, we're at really a pivotal moment in history, I think. You know, you can think back to statins or to the times when we were treating high blood pressure. You know, for a long time we were using various treatments that weren't really medicinal. And it's not till now that we're getting into that really true pharmacological state that we're treating obesity. Partly that's because of so much bias in our society that we haven't believed obesity to be truly a chronic disease. But now we are fully coming into this, despite it being, you know, deemed a disease since 2013 by the American Medical Association. And so we're embracing it. And so our hope is that in the future, we can be using it more as a prevention for potentially, you know, more than just those who are living with overweight and obesity. I think for right now, the important part to remember, you know, that, you know, we've been talking about is that because it can target so many different parts of the body, it's because there's receptors on these different organs. Receptors means kind of a landing point for the hormone to work on. And so that we know there's receptors on the heart, there's receptors on the kidneys, et cetera, so that we have so many different target points in the brain. So what you'll be seeing is more and more data, and that it's important to appreciate that this could be something incredible for you or your family members to think about, and that it's not just the medicine alone, but it's a combination therapy of medication plus a healthy lifestyle, and working with a multidisciplinary team is critical.
So let's talk about costs then, and some numbers and outcomes, which Harlan, I know is really one of your areas of expertise. These drugs are incredibly expensive, and insurance coverage is sporadic, as it is with any other drug. The two major manufacturers of these drugs, I have heard and read, quite literally cannot make enough for the worldwide demand. I've also read that if every individual in the United States, and by the way, semaglutide is FDA approved for treating the condition of overweight and obesity from ages 12 and up, which is, people don't know that. And that's a whole other area that we could speak about for an hour.
Definitely.
But I read a statistic that if every overweight or person with obesity in the United States took these medications, it would equate to a cost of $1 trillion, and it may or may not intersect with the cost saved. What can you talk about in terms of access, affordability, cost, supply and demand when you talk about these drugs?
Well, look, today we put people through the ringer to get this. I mean, you know, whether or not it's shortages or coverage, I mean, it's about $1,000 a month, out of reach for a lot of people. The people who may benefit the most, you know, may have the biggest problems trying to get them. I have great concerns that they can increase disparities in our country. What I'm trying to say when you hear me talk about this, though, is also move it away from body image and discussions about stigma and whether you want to get weight loss, but move it into the period of health. And, you know, whether people are actually wanting to try to invest in reducing risk, improving health, putting themselves in a better position, and not making a judgment about how people look to say almost it's a side effect that it's a weight loss, which, by the way, magically stops. It's like people don't keep losing weight. Now you got to be careful. People are going to go to zero. It actually equilibrates in the body at like maybe the weight that you might have naturally been at if you hadn't been in a society that's very obesogenic, where we have neuro messaging and all of that stuff. But to get to this, I think it's about us being creative. In the same way when Francis Collins was talking about Hep C, so Hep C is very expensive. But, some places were saying they were calling it the Netflix model. You pay a single price to the manufacturers, you guarantee them a margin, and now you're trying to get it to everyone who can benefit. You're basically trying to say, let's try to lower that bar. The thing is, we know this thing saves lives in the right population. We know that it reduces progression to dialysis in the right population. There's an article that just came out, observational, that was suggesting it can slow progression to dementia. And Parkinson's is another one, because we have GLP receptors in our brain. We can actually produce GLP in our brain, in the brainstem. And so, the question we've got to learn, so we're confident about what this can do. We've got to put the side effects in perspective. But if we have the potential to help save lives and help people live longer, healthier lives, then people may choose to or not to, but it shouldn't be because it's impossible for me given my budget or because of my station or because of my resources as a society. And by the way, for all the extra money that's being spent, all the additional insurance coverage that the ADA brought, our life expectancy continues to drop. Obesity in this country continues to rise. Our risk factors continue to rise. We lose ground on things like hypertension. By the way, these drugs can reduce blood pressure by about 8 points. Even our antihypertensive drugs don't do that, again, in people with obesity. So you can see I'm pro because I believe that with the right evidence, with confidence in what it can do, we want to make sure people have the opportunity to try it. If they can tolerate it, they can benefit from them.
I am going to build off of that in that the uptake right now is actually very low. A, because the demand is high, but B, because the supply chain difficulties, et cetera. And then C is that there is still hesitancy in the community at large to even consider these medications. One, because we don't have providers necessarily equipped or ready to prescribe these. Two, there's bias in prescribing these. And then three, it's a newer area of medicine. So we have to be trying to move towards greater access and especially trying to mitigate health disparities that are going to develop in this pathway. I think that it's hard when working with patients because it's a very weird space. We didn't go to medical school, trying to have conversations where we have to counsel patients on the fear they're experiencing of losing the medication because they're going to lose coverage. Having to counsel them on how we're going to switch medications to another GLP-1 and help them to maintain their health benefits they've achieved. That's such a unique, weird space, honestly, and sad that we have to spend time as providers going through that when really our healthcare system should value prevention. If it valued prevention, if it valued treating obesity upstream, knowing that we're going to downstream be able to prevent heart disease, OSA, hypertension, et cetera, we would be able to see cost savings in that. But I think right now we're holding it to a different standard. To Jen's question of, are we not going to be able to, really handle this with the trillions of dollars that it may cost? Why do we, as a society, even really challenge giving access to these medicines when we should just be automatically giving access? You know what I mean?
And what we're trying to do is sort of set the way people think about it, which is you're sitting in front of us. We are not judging how you look. We are not adding to the stigma of what you may feel by how people are biased against you if you are facing this issue. We are simply trying to say there's a pathway towards better health,
yes,
lower risk, greater longevity. And we have to fight on this because our society is like, this is the ideal and this is this. And we're all carrying body image stuff in our heads, and we have to get away from that. It's not judging you. It's saying, by the way, that for many people, it's been a lifelong struggle with, what do they call that, food noise? Food noise, yes, in their head. And people know what that is and have struggled against this. And this isn't the medical establishment judging you or saying everyone's got to be thin. It's saying we may have a medication that can treat a condition, that can give a path towards greater health. And that's a hard messaging.
It is a hard message, and I often have a line that I'll say to patients to try to bring them back from hyper-focusing on how they look and say our ultimate goal here is to help you with your health, overall quality of life, functionality, and to help you live longer. That's what we're working on. So how do we get to those 4 prongs?
Greater activity, right? Because some people have orthopedic issues that can go away if they can go this path.
Increased risk of various types of cancer. You both mentioned something that I really want to spend some time talking about, and it's the social stigma the fat shaming, the fat bias that unfortunately exists in a huge way within the medical profession and community. And I want to share a story that I'm actually not proud of, a personal, professional story of mine. Before I went to medical school, I did a year of bariatric surgery research in Pittsburgh, and our patients were 600 pounds, 700 pounds, 800 pounds. This was in 1997. At that point, and continuing for, I would say, the first 10 years I was in clinical practice, I always had an interest and passion in helping people with weight management. But in my mind, I thought, how many of you in this room have had a discussion with a doctor or healthcare provider that went like this? Your weight, let's talk about your weight. It's risking some various adverse health outcomes. You need to eat less and move more. That's what I thought. I thought this is straight thermodynamics. Calories in, calories out. Eat some carrot sticks, get on a treadmill, you won't have this problem. Fast forward, and I said that to a lot of patients in the first 10 years I was in practice. Then, being the type A person that we all are, I said, something doesn't feel right about this to me. I'm gonna go back to school. I went back to Columbia, got a master's in nutrition, got board certified in obesity medicine. And that's when everything changed. And that's when I started really understanding what anyone who has struggled with their weight has to deal with in the doctor's office. And I could actually cry thinking about the millions of people who go to their doctors and say, or hear, you have to lose weight. Why are you having such a problem? Just eat some carrot sticks and lettuce and you'll lose the weight. Or someone who weighs 300, 400, 500 pounds, you gotta exercise. Those people can't get on a treadmill or an exercise bike at that weight so easily. So I would like you both to talk a little about the stigma and fat shaming and bias that exists within medicine and how, unfortunately, a lot of people may go to their provider and say, I've been educating myself about this class of medication and I've been struggling with my weight my whole life. Maybe it's not 100, 200, 300 pounds of weight. Maybe it's 25. Maybe it's 45. But we know that there's benefits in health outcomes with the loss of just 5% of your body weight. And if someone asks for help and they are told, just eat less and move more, what should they say?
Yeah, so first off, I always tell patients that it's about advocating for yourself and advocating for your loved ones, because it's really going to be how we change the model of care that's happening right now. In the US, as you see, we have just innumerable chronic diseases that we're faced with. Obesity contributes to over 200 medical conditions. So when I talk to patients about what they can do when they're confronted by biases and stigma by healthcare professionals, which the research shows, and we have one of the leading experts in weight bias and stigma research from UCLA, Dr. Tomiyama, in the front row here, is that really the prevalence of that stigmatization is equivalent in the general community as it is by healthcare professionals. So we are not immune to it. And so, we practice in this field, we know the evidence and science, so we are treating obesity as a disease and treating patients with the respect and dignity that they deserve. Unfortunately, that's not the case often. And so I often will tell patients, if it is not working in that relationship with your provider, I advocate for them to then find another provider who will actually provide the help that they will need.
Well, we have work to do in the profession like everyone does. I mean, we're part of the society, and we've all seen it. I mean, people who are facing obesity may not get as thorough a physical examination, may not get as thorough a history. I mean, the kind of biases that exist are ones that the medical profession needs to work on. Let me just give maybe what might be a useful frame about this that I use to try to teach about this, which is I actually don't think of obesity differently than I think about hypertension. In societies where people are active all the time, there's not as much salt, it's a different kind of society. Hypertension is pretty rare, actually. But when people move to a hypertension-ogenic society, where like this, hypertension becomes much more prevalent. It's a combination of our behaviors, our diets, our context of our lives, our stress, whole range of things, And when we see someone with hypertension, we do talk to them about, you should If you're more active and you eat a DASH diet, a certain kind of diet that, has lower salt, you can lower your blood pressure. But we don't stop there. We don't come in and just say, you need to do this and this is just your willpower. It's your fault you've got hypertension, and I'm not treating you with drugs. Get on it yourself. And I think it's the same thing for people who are facing obesity. They're coming in, and sure, we need to supplement with messaging around healthy lifestyle, but they are facing something within the context of this society and the way in which our bodies and humans react to a society like this, that for some people, many people, 40% of our population, you have an inexorable rise in weight and face obesity. And as doctors, what we need to do is the same way we treat hypertension, which is good messaging around lifestyle, but also now that we have effective medications that can help treat this, we should be using them. And in addition, by the way, I think if we treat obesity, by the way, I may not have to treat hypertension anymore, may not have to treat elevated lipids anymore. People may reverse diabetes and not get diabetes. I mean, we've been treating the manifestations in many people of the obesity, but not the actual obesity itself. Well, we didn't have the tools. But now we do.
Yeah, I just want to add one more comment in that there is stigma also around the treatments that people are receiving.
That's right.
And so even there's stigma of, oh, you took the medication, you took the easy way out. You got bariatric surgery, oh gosh, so there's
Piece of cake.
Right, exactly. Right. It's work to have those involved tools in your treatment plan. It's not just a one and done. They're always in a combination of other treatments. I like to parallel that with, cancer treatment. Sometimes you're going to need a little bit of chemotherapy, radiation, lifestyle modification, maybe stopping smoking, and having to work with multiple types of providers. That's the same model of care that we offer for obesity in multidisciplinary centers like ours that we're up here. So it's important to know that that's the type of treatment you should be looking for. You should be advocating to loved ones to be trying to seek.
And we don't tell people with hypertension or high lipids, you're taking the easy way out by taking pills.
Exactly.
Right.
We say modify your lifestyle, but you can also help yourself.
And I use the example, it's interesting, you use cancer, you use hypertension, I use mental health, which also needs, by the way, of course, to be destigmatized. But could you imagine the parallel if a patient or someone sat in front of you and said, I have really problematic anxiety or depression, and I'd like to start on a medication? Would we be shaming them for doing that? Right. By the way, we should also be saying, sure, here are your options for pharmacologic management, and do you speak to a psychotherapist or a social worker? It's not either or, it's both. We have 18 minutes left. Usually they ask us to open it up for questions at 10, but I see pretty much standing room only back there, so I want to give more time for questions, and so we have microphones going around. Why don't you start there, sir?
Oh, they're holding the microphone. I'm Larry Bouchard, and I was on a previous panel. I'm a U.S. congressman. And the question I have is about what kind of ongoing studies we have. And the reason I bring this up is because in D.C., we have the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and they score healthcare improperly, in my view. They don't look at long-term savings. So in this space, if we're going to get Medicare to cover these medications, the challenge is going to be the cost, because they do it over a 10-year budget window. But if we have data to show, legitimate data, not just anecdotal stuff here and there, we can show long-term savings, then we can potentially, members of Congress can push Medicare to cover these medications. And as you know, as Medicare goes, commercial coverage goes sometimes. So my question to you all is, do we have long-term studies that not just studies that get FDA approval, but that can demonstrate to CMS and the Congressional Budget Office that we should be paying for these because they actually save money, not cost us money?
Well, I can just say that this is precisely the kind of studies that our group has been suggesting and proposing. The question is where the funding is going to come from. What we've suggested is there need to be real-world, large-scale digital registries where people are connected and they're able to both give us line of sight into their experience on the meds long-term, because they're different than people in trial populations. But even more importantly, like you said, what does it do to utilization for orthopedic procedures, for cancer? 200 conditions associated with obesity. If we start using these medications and treating them, and even unrelated obesity, we can start slowing the rise in Parkinson's. We start reducing strokes. We start reducing heart attacks and disability in the country. what impact does it have? I think these are the most important studies for us to do right now, to be able to track this and understand it, put it in perspective. We also, making these drugs is a lot cheaper than what they're charging, and they want to tell us, they have to do this. There are 50 or 100 of these drugs in the pipeline. I am confident that the price of these drugs is going to come down. And again, I would not want to see any American, and honestly within the whole world, not benefit from something that could help them be healthier and live longer. And so we need the data, but we also need the values that are going to say, what is the North Star here about what we're trying to do with healthcare? And by the way, we ought to be abandoning a lot of stuff we do that doesn't help anybody.
There was a question over there. Yes, ma'am. Right here.
Yeah, it's really along the same lines. Since you've had this drug out for diabetes for a while, do we at least have studies on diabetes and what problems it may cause versus none?
You want to take that?
There have been no long-term detrimental issues to one's health by having these medications on boards for type 2 diabetes. So as Jen mentioned, we've had these since 2005, multiple types of GLP-1s, meaning there's just a little bit of a variation with them. They're getting more and more efficacious with how much they can lower A1C, how much they can improve cardiometabolic outcomes, and how much weight one can lose. The next drug to come out is going to be a triple agonist, meaning GLP, GIP, and it's a glucagon agonist that's going to be a retatrutide drug is the name, and help individuals lose 25% of their total body weight in 48 weeks. So the data just keeps getting stronger. Building off of it, we've shown no long-term issues with taking these medications thus far. And what you've heard maybe in the media of pancreatitis, thyroid cancer, the risk for those type of issues with this class of medication is less than 1%. And importantly, when working with a provider, we screen to make sure you are the right candidate for this medication. This isn't just handing it out to everybody, right? We use the same forethought we would use before we prescribe even a baby aspirin. So it's the same way that we would do standard of
And
care.
some of those side effects are still theoretical. We're not sure even about some of them. And that's why I'm more bullish on it, because it's been on the market. These drugs have been on the market since 2005. So
And I want to encourage everyone, because we could talk about risks for an hour. When you ask, and it's the right question to ask about a risk of a medication, right? But it's not just what's the risk of the medication, one question. You have to ask 4 questions. What's the risk of the medication? What's the risk of taking it? What's the risk of not taking it? What's the benefit of taking it, and what's the benefit of not taking it? And in our world, sometimes you can put actual numbers in those 4 boxes, and then it becomes real easy to make a clinical decision or a decision on the part of the patient. But it's not just what are the risks, it's what are the risks of not treating the conditions of overweight and obesity. So you can ask those 4 questions for any clinical decision that you have to make. Yes, sir.
I started using Exendin 4, which is the Gila Monster drug, in 2001. So I currently have 23 years of experience with the drugs, and they are incredibly safe. But the most remarkable thing is after 2 weeks, patients were coming in. These were all in clinical trials, and they said, for the first time in my life, I know what it feels like to be full. So it's working at the satiety center in the brain, and it turns it off. Now it turns it on, I'm sorry. Now that's critically important, because every single study that has discontinued the drug shows a 50% weight regain in the first year. So going back to the issue of chronicity, these are not drugs that you use for a short period of time and then go off. If you do that, that's cosmetic. That's not medical. So we currently have very limited data on how to discontinue the drugs and maintain the weight loss.
Yeah, I want to actually, Amanda, can you talk briefly about, there hasn't been any formally published algorithms yet. So physicians like us who are board certified in obesity medicine, we're individualizing it, so to speak, with our patients. But what does a maintenance regimen, what could it look like?
Yeah, so the
in your
maintenance
world?
regimen really varies, and it's an individualized approach for every single patient. So it's not going to be a cookie cutter that everyone's on a standard dose and stays on that for a life. I appreciate you bringing up that point, because that's an often misconception, because in the media, you're going to be seeing the overhyped type of Hollywood taking it to get ready for a party next month. We're over-focusing on a very small portion of the people taking this medicine. Who we should be focusing on is really the silent majority of Americans who have numerous chronic diseases and would benefit from these medications. And it is indicated to use long-term. If these medications were to stop, the disease comes back. We would assume that to be true, though, for any medical condition.
Yes, in the back, right there.
Just building on this rebound topic, I'd be curious, especially with the obstetric background, this context around women trying to use Ozempic to improve fertility. You mentioned, approved for individuals over 12 years old, impact if I'm just curious what the line of thinking is around that.
Great question. So I think, first of all, in the world of women's health, OBGYN, we know when you talk about the reproductive age group that extremes of body weight are bad for our fertility. That has been known for a long time, both on the underweight and the overweight side. We've seen published reports and anecdotal reports in popular media, in peer-reviewed medical journals about women of reproductive age who go on these medications on the advice of their OBGYN, by the way, to lose weight before they become pregnant. That, in my medical opinion, is called good medicine, because we know that the risks for a woman who starts her pregnancy with obesity are extremely high. So women losing weight before they conceive, that's a huge population that we can really kind of individualize, intervene in, make a big difference in the outcomes of the fetus as well as the mother. And then perimenopause. The average woman gains 5 to 10 pounds in the few years that she goes through menopause. And then what do we see happen? Heart disease risk goes up, depression goes up, cancer risk goes up. So if we can identify these populations for just women, that's going to be a very significant benefit.
I think you may see this for a wide variety of situations. So that's pre-pregnancy, but imagine someone who is class 3 obesity, who's undergoing hip replacement or major cardiac surgery, or things that we know their risk is markedly increased if they're going to go into that with extreme obesity. And so it may be that this is a pre-habbing, this is pre-surgery, a pre-event, and then you try to help people afterwards.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Kwaku Hazel. I'm a metabolic bariatric surgeon at the University of Colorado. And intriguing conversation. And I also co-founded a community-based organization that addresses health disparities. Bariatric or metabolic surgery treats all of these conditions you're talking about at the same or even better rates than the medication. It also, in the long term, might be cheaper than these medications. Unfortunately, in the US, as bariatric surgeons, we only have the capacity to treat less than 5% of the population that need it. So these medications are amazing. I embrace them and use them in my practice. My question is to circle back to the health disparities. When COVID came and the COVID vaccines were sought after by everybody, we saw all these health disparities with it. With these medications, with how good they are and how sought after they are, what program studies are out there that are looking at preventing these health disparities? Because the majority of people who need these drugs are the people who can't get access to them.
We published a study where we looked at national data on this about who most qualifies for these strategies and who has least amount of resources to be able to afford them, whether through underinsurance, no insurance, or income that wouldn't give them any even opportunity to participate. And as you're suggesting, this is a big concern of mine. And there are two things going on. There was an article recently on Stat talking about people expressing in the black community that this is about whiteness and thinness, and in the black community there's identity issues, and this is who we are. And so we need to both communicate, talk to communities, understand, and we need to make sure that no one is denied access to beneficial strategies. If we don't take a proactive, we talk about anti-racism, if we don't take a proactive approach to this and we just approach it passively, we will enlarge what are already tragic disparities that exist within this country. We just published last week for Juneteenth that in the last 22 years, there have been 800,000 excess age-adjusted deaths more in the Black Americans than in white Americans because of increased cardiovascular death risk. 2.4 million years of potential life lost. If one group of Americans are going to get great access to medications that can reduce risk and others are not, we're going to add to that tragedy. So the question is, we need to be focused on exactly what is the fairness here? How are we going to make sure that everyone benefits from advances?
In the back? Yes. Hold on. Microphones are coming.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but because professionally I'm a very, very strong advocate of using these medications. But I've read with a little concern some of the signals that came out of Europe that the FDA has looked at about an increased incidence of depression and suicidality in patients using this class of medications. And I'm just wondering if there's anything new you can address about this data.
Yeah, so in January of this year and then April of this year, the European and agencies similar to our FDA basically that oversees these medications said that they actually looked into these cases that there was concern for suicidality increase or depression rates increased, and what they found was that the data wasn't supporting it. We actually have data to show that the depression rates go down and anxiety actually can improve with these medications. So again, I'm glad you bring that up because often patients, I get messages about it, we talk about it in the clinic because there is a hyper focus of these kind of negative aspects of these medications, which is, I think, always important to take a step back, and is fascinating that there is a negative light on these, again, because of the perception of obesity and treatment, and questioning, should these individuals really get to take these medications, or should they just do it on their own?
And I also think it's important when you hear headlines like this, when any of us hear headlines, I don't care what initials you may or may not have after your name, understand that association is not the same thing as causation in medicine and science. So, someone could get a COVID vaccine, walk out the door of the pharmacy and get into a car accident. The vaccine did not cause the car accident, but it's associated with it. And so a lot of the headlines about suicidality and depression were based on association, not causation. And we have to remember that if you look at a Venn diagram, unfortunately, a certain number of people at baseline will have suicidal depression and suicidal ideation. A certain number of people at baseline will have overweight and obesity. Where they overlap and where those people might be taking GLP-1s is where those headlines come from.
But just to say, it's such an important point. I think it's back to what the congressman said too, which is the studies that are needed post-market. As we sell, as millions and millions more people are on these medications, we have to be prepared to pick up signals that we might not have been able to pick up within the trials. Right. And so they have to be robust science, but we need these in place so we can know these risks as they emerge.
Yeah. We have time. If there are two quick questions, yes, sir. Very quick, maybe one. Sorry, not your fault.
I am Anupam Agarwal. I am a cardiologist. My question is, there were some small reports published. The N was small, I agree, where MRI was done to show that people not only use the fat, but also muscle mass. And the second question is, as far as increasing the longevity, do we have any outcome trial to substantiate that claim that GLP-1 increases the longevity?
I think you'll just have time for the muscle mass one.
Yeah, so for muscle mass, inherently, when any individual loses weight, a human loses weight, you're going to lose a combination of fat mass and you're going to lose some muscle mass. The type of muscle mass you lose, though, we actually don't have good studies on. We don't understand if they're losing lean body mass, if they're losing in terms of total muscle mass. So we really need to actually have more studies on this because right now it's more speculative, and we do have to work closely with providers for our patients because what happens is that there's concern for inadequate nutrition because these medications are so effective at reducing appetite that if an individual takes it and then just says, says, well, I'm going to stop eating because then I'm going to lose more weight. That's not the right way to go. That's not what we're promoting. We're promoting health, balanced diet, and doing it safely with your provider.
Yeah.
And I'll just say we recommend resistance training for one thing. Next generation meds are set to address this, and we don't really know what the implications are. With regard to longevity, yeah, there's evidence accumulating that longevity is part of this because of increased mortality rates.
Just to wrap up, and I want to thank everyone for your interest and your thoughtful questions. You can follow us on social media. Amanda, can you just tell everyone what?
Yes, I am Dr. Mamacita.
Very nice.
And
Harlan?
on X, I'm at HMK Yale, YAL.
And I'm on Instagram at DRJ Ashton. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you so much for your attention.